My, oh my. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play fantasy. I know I turned 2 in a day, but the lace isn't hot in my veins. I can turn 2 in every way, so I turn to you 2 today and smash play. I'm prepared to listen. The X-Fippin' wit got me looking way past the pitches. Statistics all that I know, and I know that who is on first, he can say I'm ready to go. I ain't trying to steal second or third, cause I wanna win first. How am I to put all of these numbers to words? I know the terms from A to Z, it's like a gift and a curse. I know the difference between a splitter and a curve, but if I can't put it into points, man, then what's it worth? I need the truth, I need knowledge. Found this podcast with all of it, but what they call it? Turn 2, what it do? Win leagues, catch out. Peace.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Turn 2 podcast. I'm your host, Matt Williams. You can find me on Twitter at MATTWI77IAMS. We are back with a special episode. We have a fantastic guest. We're going to be talking about the evolution of analytics in fantasy baseball and how to best use all of the massive amount of tools at your disposal for the modern player. So without further ado, we're just one of the kings, literally the kings of fantasy baseball. He needs no introduction. Mr. Ron Shandler is joining me on the show. Ron, thank you for taking the time. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, Matt. I'm glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
So there's a lot we can talk about. We are going to, like I said, to everyone listening, we are going to get to the main topic will be analytics, because we have Ron on. We're going to talk a little bit of math. We're going to talk a little bit about how to break down the value of fantasy players. But first, there is a ton going on in fantasy. So we're going to talk about at least some of the more recent activities that have gone on to kind of give our takes, and then we'll get into the main topic. So yeah, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. The Matt Olson, Freddie Freeman situation with the Braves. Braves fans are heartbroken. Scott White over at CBS has made no secret he's not a fan of what's going on. The Braves move on from Freddie Freeman, not even letting his camp kind of know what's going on. They made their decision. They weren't going 6 years on Freddie or whatever he ends up asking for. They get Matt Olson from the A's. Beautiful park for him. Sets up nicely for a lefty with his power. They immediately sign him to an 8-year extension. So how do you like that in general for the Braves? I mean, I think it's cold-blooded, but I think it was the right decision. But just from a fantasy perspective, how do you feel about Matt Olson? Because he was being drafted around the 4th, 5th round in that area where Pete Alonso, Paul Goldschmidt was going. Some people think it's a reach to get a first baseman there. Some people love Olson. So where do you land on Olson in general? And does this move change much for you in terms of his value for this year?
Well, as a Matt Olson owner in a keeper league that uses OBP, I'm a very happy camper right now. But I think the key to this being a good deal for the Braves comes down to one number, and that's Olson's strikeout rate. The gains he made last year were astounding. And if he can maintain that, I think they'll get a good chunk of productivity out of his 8-year contract. The thing is, though, on a pure skills basis, I think Freeman's a better player. Maybe it's not as much power as Olson, but I'll take a 30-homer, 300 hitter with great plate skills over a 40-homer, 260 hitter with questionable plate skills every time. And Olson could be a 45 home run hitter. I mean, the park effects, like you said, are in his favor. Oakland suppresses left-handed power by about, I think, 19%. Atlanta increases it by about 10, 12%. So we could definitely see some homer games there. However, if Olson reverts back to his old ways, I think we could see a sharp decline in his output about halfway through that contract, if not sooner. While Freeman, I think because he has got such consistently good plate skills over his career, could still be a productive hitter for a long time. So I think we need to keep a close eye on that strikeout rate and see how he does. From a fan perspective, though, just quickly on a fan perspective, I feel badly for the Braves fans, but I remember what the Cardinals fans went through when Albert Pujols signed with the Angels, and they survived, and it turned out to be a good deal. I think the Braves have captured the best of Freeman's career, most likely. And although he'll probably still have a few good years ahead of him on a grand scale, on an overall scale, I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I agree with you across the board. Yeah, it's hard to. I try to shed some light on the Braves fans, telling them, all right, it is a business. It's hard to get behind that. I mean, Freeman leaving is like if David Wright had left in the middle before he signed the extension with the Mets. Like it would have ripped the heart out of the fans, no matter what happened. But obviously, he wasn't. The age and everything wasn't quite the same. Uh, the Braves continue to sign these team friendly deals. I mean, CBA aside, we can't get into the Braves the amount of money they're making out in the open. We don't need to get in an argument or a discussion about that, but it's a good deal over 8 years. They even have a team option snuck in there at the end if he's doing well. 21 million a year, not too bad. The Braves continue to sign good contract after good contract to allow them flexibility. I was actually shocked in general just because they don't have a track record of giving up a ton of prospects. They usually sign these like deals like for people in 1 year, and they don't have a track record of signing very long-term deals like this. So uh eh, hey, good for them. Matt Chapman to the Jays just happened. they gave up they gave up a decent amount. You got to give it to the Athletics. Unlike the Reds, who are breaking it down, even though they were that close to the playoffs, the A's at least made it known and everyone knew this was coming. If you're an A's fan, it doesn't make it any easier, but they're getting nice returns on most of these deals. They got themselves Kevin Smith, who's probably going to play every day, third baseman for them. They got Gunnar, who's probably one of the right now he's like the fifth ranked right-handed pitching prospect in baseball. Not too bad. But let's stick with the major league level for now with the Jays. How do you like Matt Chapman? He struggled the last couple of years. The hard contact was still there. I don't know if necessarily the hip has just been hindering him. But either way, they got a great defensive upgrade for their pitching staff. And if he bounces back, that is one heck of a lineup to be in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key thing. Because of his defense, that really helps the pitching staff out a lot. And given the staff that they have there, they can use some good defense in the infield. So I think it's a great deal for them. It pushes it pushes Kevin Biggio to full time at second base pretty much. I think they're a really solid team right now. I think it's a great deal.
Yeah, and in nice depth. I wasn't sure if I know the A's are looking for prospects, but I wasn't sure if Espinal or Biggio might be going the other way in this deal. They keep them both, so nice depth as well.
Yeah.
Espinal obviously can help you out as short and third. So yeah, the the rumor now is the Jays are actually talking to the Guardians about Jose
Of course,
Ramirez.
Ramirez.
I don't see it happening, but they
I
have the
don't see it either.
they have the depth to do it, and they're going to put it. They're talking about putting him in second. I can't even imagine.
Nah,
Uh,
but on the other side of this deal, I am a real big Kevin Smith fan. I don't know why, but I am. I He was in the XFL keeper league last November. We were doing the auction, and I was actually considering bidding real dollars for him because there's just something about his upside that I really like. And now that he's got a full time shot with the A's, I think we could see some interesting stuff coming out of him.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real like major league like the movie vibe going on with Oakland on how they I don't know, are they trying to finish last to move to Vegas. But yeah, I love I love some of the players they were getting because on top of gutting their team, they didn't have much of a prospect base
Mhm.
to speak of to build on. So they're kind of creating that, but they're doing a good for what they're deciding to do. They're doing a good job of doing it.
Yeah.
The Twins plan for anyone listening to the podcast, throwing up the fake air quotes. I don't know what they're doing. I love the trade. I mean, they trade Jose Barrios last year. They get a nice return in Simeon Wood Richardson, and I'm missing the main piece in my head right now.
I don't remember.
Austin Martin. And then they now they trade for Sonny Gray. Don't give up a ton. They give up their first round pick from last year, although there was a lot of talk that maybe he was built for a reliever long term. So all in all, if you add everything together from what they gave up, they got back for Barrios, what they gave up for Gray, they're in a decent spot if Gray is healthy. So they add Sonny Gray, they sell Josh Donaldson for the rumor of possibly signing Trevor Story. But again, we can't judge their offseason until they do sign like, a Trevor Story. But what do you think the Twins, and if you're a Twins fan, how are you feeling about the direction they're going? Because they're aggressive, and whatever their goal is, they're at least aggressive in doing whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah, but you can't figure out what they're doing. It's
Yeah.
I mean, I take a look at the depth chart in the roster here, and I'm saying, okay, Sonny Gray is a nice solid starter. On any other team, he's a 2 or 3, not a number 1. And behind him, Randy Dobnik. I don't think so. Ober's got some upside. I like him. What can we count from Dylan Bundy? I mean, it's the pitching staff is just not is not all that good, and it's. Uh, I think they're counting on Byron Buxton to have a 40-40 season. That's got to be it, because I can't figure out what they're thinking here. It's a lot of patchwork type stuff, and unless there's more deals coming down the pike, and maybe there is, I don't really see them as a playoff contender.
Yeah, I mean, you get they can't be in the mix for the A's starters that are left, like a Montas or Manaea, because
Mhm.
it would be counterproductive to their long term goal. I mean, Johnny Cueto, bringing back Pineda. I mean, you gotta think that if they're serious, that has got to be the direction they're going in. Bringing a couple of veteran starters that still won't get them where they need to
No,
be, but
no,
at a minimum, you would think that that is what they have to do.
right.
Um, so good luck to Twins fans. You have a good offense. Signing Trevor Story is not going to solve your problems, even though it'll be pretty interesting to watch. So yeah, we're talking about the Oakland and Cincinnati. You're breaking everything down. Let's talk about Cincinnati. They're gutting the team for no reason. They would have made the playoffs last year if the current playoff system was in. But whatever, for whatever reason, they decided nope, they don't want anything to do with that. They even trade away Jesse Winker out of the blue. Eugenio Suarez leaves just to get rid of his money. What does this leave for the Reds lineup? Interesting stuff. Tyler Stevenson, who was already a candidate to possibly get some DH at bats, certainly is a candidate now. Could bat third or even cleanup for this team. How do you feel about Stevenson in this year in the just the market for catcher, where you kind of you have Smith, Salvador Perez, JT Realmuto at the top, then you have that wild card Varsho, Contreras, Grandal, and then you have this little weird tier of Keeper Ruiz and Stevenson as a couple of guys that maybe could have had DH at bats. Ruiz certainly doesn't have them anymore with Nelson Cruz around. But Stevenson, he's kind of in that weird tier by himself. So how do you feel about Stevenson this year in redraft leagues? Because the team is worse, but he's in a nice lineup position.
Well, you have to look at the catcher position as a whole, and Stevenson right now is going, I think, in around the 140s in drafts. I think he's exactly at the tier you need to be looking at, because I think, given the high regression potential for Sal Perez, I'm personally not in on the Sal Perez, because I think there's too much regression in there, especially at the price that he's going at. So I like to draft in the middle tier of catchers there, and I think Stevenson is one of those guys that I would be targeting.
I agree on Salvador Perez, by the way. I mean, at his age, again, he posted a career worst plate discipline metrics, which he has shown the ability to overcome. Some people can do that, but yeah, for where he's going, sometimes in the second round, it's a
Yeah.
little much. Yeah, the Stevenson area, I don't know where his draft price will go now that he's been moved. I want to see where Mitch Garver is being led up to. I liked his
Mhm.
price before. Now I assume there's going to be a little kick. The rest of the Reds lineup, there's not too much. Jake Fraley will be in a platoon. The guy that's interesting to me is Aquino. Is he in every day? I don't know what else they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to platoon him, but as it stands, roster resource at least currently believes he'll be an everyday player in deep formats. If you're starving for power in at a draft champions or a draft and hold, he's certainly an option. But right now, he went from a guy that you weren't sure was even going to get in there for a few at bats a week to possibly starting every day. So the juggernaut Aquino, any interest in taking a flyer on him recapturing some of that rookie magic?
Well, I tell you, I mean, he doesn't have much in the way of platoon splits, so you either use him or you don't. I mean, he
Yep.
hits pretty much the same way against righties or lefties. But he hasn't seen the upside of a 200 average now in 3 years, so it's I don't know, not the type of person I want to bet on right now. Especially his strikeout rate is like 45%. It's last year it was pretty bad. I don't think he'd be on my team.
A poor man's Joey Gallo.
Really.
Certainly a risk. The starting rotation, which is probably going to be more depleted. The Tyler Mahle rumors are already out there. The Luis Castillo ones are already there. It seems hardly beneficial for them to hold on to him at this point.
Yeah.
But they trade for Justin Dunn, who may not be ready for the start of the season, but will be in probably very shortly after. They're talking about Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, and Brandon Williamson, who they also acquired from Seattle, being available to be in the rotation this year. I am usually not a fan in redraft of holding on to pitchers, but these are a few interesting guys, and you can certainly, if you have a deep bench or anything in redraft, you can try to stash a few of these guys and see how it works out. Any interest in any of these guys? I actually just drafted Justin Dunn in a draft and hold very, very late. Because, as a former Matt, I'm always been following an interesting interest in him. And I feel like he probably has secured himself a spot in that rotation for at least this season if he can stay healthy. And again, innings are innings at a certain point in draft and hold. So don't read anything too much into it, everybody, that I drafted him. But Ron, any interest in these young guys in the Reds rotation? Obviously a terrible ballpark, but again, very, very talented.
I think of those three you mentioned, the only one I'd have even marginal interest in is the lefty Lodolo. I think his metrics show some upside. He showed it, he could pitch to perhaps an ERA under 4. The others, you're going to end up with the ERAs 4.50 and higher, especially in a redraft league this year. So I'm not going anywhere near there. Maybe in a reserve round, I'd grab Lodolo, but that's about it.
They Yeah, it's more or less it's a crapshoot. You never know what that. I mean, I love Hunter Green, but it doesn't seem the right time. We don't know how aggressive the Reds will be and bring him up anyway.
Mhm.
But moving over to the A's, we already talked about Kevin Smith, like him a lot. Other than that, it's who knows? I mean, Tony Kemp is going to be at the top of this lineup. We already knew that. Um, Eric Timms, they brought him back over. Maybe he sees some everyday at bats. Seth Brown. Do we see a platoonless Seth Brown for a whole year? I mean, he should be in a platoon, but they can't necessarily afford to do it. We were talking about poor man Joey Gallows. I think Seth Brown could do a little better than that, but he certainly has a lot of power in that bat. So I'm interested there. The A's don't have a ton of options, and I don't necessarily see them bringing additional players in to scare away any at bats from the players they have. So yeah, Timms, Brown. I mean, what do you see here from them gutting this offense? Because Pinder. I mean, the at bats are coming from somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are just retread players who, I mean, they're 28, 29, 30 years old. Thames is 35, I think. And, but he's had a history of being, productive in the past. Can he still be productive? He hit 30 home runs back in 2017, 2018. So he can hit at the major league level. As far as, as far as Pinder, I never really was much into Pinder. Wait for a guy like Laureano to come back after a suspension. Patches is an interesting player. It's a lot of patchwork type stuff here. And once they get rid of their frontline pitchers like Montas and Minea, it's I don't know if they'll be a fun team to watch, and that's the thing that I kind of look at. Yeah, you can rebuild, you could go through these player moves, but if you're not a fun team to watch, the players that I have left right now have a lot of really patchwork skills. There's not a lot of really high skilled talent here that's ready to play at the majors. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Even if they get back ready to rookies that can be promoted immediately, like the Kevin Smith, you probably look at it about a bunch of struggling rookies at that point anyway. Because
Oh sure.
I mean, aside from the pitchers, Laureano could certainly be traded. They just brought in another catcher. They already had Soderstrom. They bring in another catcher in a trade. So Sean Murphy could certainly be on his way out as well, as they bring in Shea Langoliers from the Braves.
Mhm.
So again, A's fans, feel sorry for you, but you are doing well on the trades. There's teams that have broken down before and rebuilt and have not have not acquired good talent to do that. I mean, the Cubs didn't necessarily do a great job when they broke everything down, but again, they were trading guys that did not have a lot of didn't have a lot of control left. So that's the recent news in baseball. Let's right now we're going to get into our main topic of the show. As a reminder to everyone listening, we're just discuss basically the evolution of analytics in fantasy baseball. There's so much that has changed, even from year to year. Just more and more stuff to look at, more and more noise, and we're going to talk about what to pay attention to and what has changed. So, just what are your thoughts in general? This is more of just a broad question to start us off with. If you can just kind of give us your general thoughts on the evolution of baseball analytics and analysis in fantasy. What do you think has improved the most from 10 years ago to now? Like, what have we gotten really better at? What do you feel now is so much different than it was even 10 years ago in terms of ease or the ability to identify certain things that have maybe put the entire market or the entire industry kind of ahead of the game onto a more level playing field?
Well, I'll go back even further than 10 years because I've been doing this now for almost 40 years. I guess in order to know what's improved, we have to know where it all started, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the process of writing a book, an historical memoir that goes back to the early days of fantasy baseball and the evolution of analytics is part of that story. So I guess you could say that it really all starts with Bill James and the work that he did back then in trying to incorporate his research into the fantasy process. Even though he himself wasn't a big fan of the rotisserie game. And at the beginning, it was all rotisserie. That was everything. So we were all trying to focus on what was then just an 8 category game and trying to analyze and predict what players going to do in those 8 categories. And back then, it was just the traditional statistics. So home runs were projected from past home runs. ERA was projected from past ERA. And we really didn't even do projections for almost a decade into the industry. John Benson was probably the most prolific writer back then, and he described his process of just assimilating assessing each team's roster and seeing where the playing time would go, then just estimate what he thought each player would do. In fact, Alex Patton was publishing dollar values before we even started doing player projections.
It's funny that it's still the most important thing in the industry is trying to perfect playing time projection. It's still the most important thing that no one is quite perfected, but we've certainly obviously gotten better at it.
Yeah. And now, our projections are what drive our dollar values. But back then, they just had dollar values and just reverse engineered them into projections, which was kind of weird, but that's what we were doing. So in the early 1990s, I was basically the first to write about the component skills. I was using strikeout rates, strikeout to walk ratios, things like that to evaluate players. And I wrote about how the difference between a pitcher's ERA and his WHIP could be measured by his strand rate or left on base percentage. And that metric turned out to be an amazing leading indicator to show what direction a pitcher's ERA would go. So I guess pitching metrics were the first to make some inroads in that regard. In fact, thinking back, my first breakthrough in that was with a pitcher named Denny Nagel, who was terrible for several years. But he kept putting up solid support metrics. Once he improved his left on base percentage, that's when he broke out and was similar with Jose Lima in 1998.
I can't think of Denny Nagel without thinking of him doing that train noise with his mouth. Do you remember that? You see that in interviews? Anyone who's listening knows what I'm talking about is laughing. Everyone else is wildly confused. Go ahead.
Okay. Don't remember that. So, yeah, I mean, from there, the analytical community basically just exploded. We started getting more and more granular in the metrics, learning more and more about the elements that feed the statistics that we play the game with. I've been doing projections now since 1989. It was the early 90s when others started doing them. You think about it, Pacoda didn't start till 2003. So really, you talk about the last 10 years, we made that huge leap with StatCast and PitchFX and all that sort of stuff just in the last 10 or 15 years has just given us an entirely new perspective of looking at the more granular elements of the game. And what I think has happened is that we were doing a really good job now of describing player performance, and that's the thing that is really important to give us a good sense of what players are all about. The problem, I think, is that we're trying to use a lot of this data to project, and while we can describe performance really now using these advanced metrics, I think we're still a ways away from being able to use it to do really good performance forecasting. So that's I think is the next frontier.
Yeah, which is people are always trying to do that. They're always, and they, like you were saying, the things like expected statistics. Everyone's always trying to take predictive metrics and kind of force it onto predictive rather than descriptive, I should say. So yeah, that definitely seems like it's the next thing that everyone is trying to break through. And to a degree, they keep kind of inching closer and closer. They're doing a good job of the pitching metrics. There's so many out there now. Do you think now in the industry, do you think that if we've advanced more in terms of practical predicting? Do you think that where we are in advanced analytics, do you think we are better off where we are in predicting hitters or pitchers? Because there's certainly a lot more, and it's a lot less noisy to describe and predict what a hitter is going to do. There's only so many things, and even if you dive into a scouting aspect, there's a lot less to do as far as looking at stance and there's so many things with like the launch angle and standard deviation of launch angle. There's so many things that confuse the a newer player that is going in and seeing all these numbers in front of them. But there is a ton to break down basically something that is rather a simple event. Whereas pitching, there is so much. You have to, it all has to, I mean, height and how they set up and release point and the different, spin rate and the other arsenal and how they use it versus right-handed and left-handed pitchers, velocity. I mean, there's a ton. So I feel like there's a ton to describe, as I ramble on here, there's a ton to help us analyze hitters, but I feel like that was never really as difficult as analyzing pitchers. Whereas now there is a ton more to analyze pitchers, but I'm not exactly sure if we're necessarily that much closer to being as accurate. So I'll just state the simple question that I 5 minutes to answer myself. Right now, do you feel like we've advanced to a part where we're better off analyzing hitters or pitchers at this moment?
Well, you're right. There's more to analyze with pitchers, but I think we're just at a point in time right now where this is what we have and this is what we have to work with. But I think ultimately we'll be able to find the metrics and find the evaluative measures that can look at both sides of the equation, because the game happens from both sides. Um, and again, I think the danger with all this stuff is looking at these metrics as the be all and end all. I think they're great at describing; they're not great at projecting. One of the things I really hate seeing these days is average exit velocity being used for anything more than just a nice number to look at. Or max
I always
exit
tell
velocity.
people you can
Yeah,
have you can hit half your balls at 1 mile an hour and half at 101.
right.
Your average exit velocity is gonna, just gonna be right in the middle. It's like, it's such a average launch angle
Yeah,
is just as worthless. Average anything is pretty bad, even batting average, but obviously
yeah.
not to, that extent. But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, the error bars are wide with every metric that we look at, and when and I mean, you said it. And average anything is really a deceptive way to look at anything. So we just have to be really careful and how we look at the numbers and how we use the numbers. And frankly, I look at the numbers a lot less than I ever used to. I think they are deceptive. They don't really they're too. I think we're trying to instill a level of precision in a game that's played by human beings, and that is highly problematic to me. And that's why a lot of the work that I've been doing now is looking at skills in more broad tiers. The broad assessment balance sheet that I do on babsbaseball.com now is really all about assessing skill in broad tiers and trying to create profiles of different types of player skills and rating players that way. Because once we get too down into the weeds and trying to predict, oh, a guy's going to hit 35 home runs versus your projection says 32, mine says 35. And, at the end of the day, it's 3 gusts of wind that could be the difference between you and me. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, a millimeter is the difference between, like, a fly ball and a Titanic home run sometimes.
exactly.
And this is a good transition into the next couple of questions. The next one being, is there too much data? Which I think we kind of answered sort of already.
Yeah.
You're talking about, but to newer players or to even experienced ones, there's plenty of high stakes players that are really good when it comes to strategy, and they'll admit that maybe player analysis isn't their strong point. They'll lean on other people to do that. But they'll still look at the advanced information for themselves, and they have to try to pick and choose what is actually useful and what can help me determine what is if you want to dig into, the micro of it rather than macro, what is something interesting to look at for someone like me who is a full-on nerd for both baseball and math. I love breaking all this down, and I'm like looking into the other things. I do 25-page threads on Twitter breaking down players into the extreme micro. But again, I go into scouting. I talk to beat writers. I go into everything. But that's because I like doing it. So there's that too. I mean, we play fantasy baseball, and I just love baseball. So I just like going into this. I like digging into it and just seeing what I find. But as far as there being too much data, which is the question we talked about, average launch angle, for example. An average is worthless because if you had a ton of pop-ups and a ton of ground balls, your average launch angle may look ideal when in fact you're a horrible hitter. There's metrics like the standard deviation of launch angle. If anyone's not familiar with that, the basic way to sum that up is it measures a hitter's back control. So, something if you're looking at it, you kind of want something under 30 degrees, maybe even under 28 degrees. But all it is showing you is the gap between the high and low end is smaller. So you want someone who shows you, like Nick Castellanos typically is near the league because he hits a ton of line drives and he knows what he's doing at the plate. And that's the kind of thing you want to look at. So I like some things like that where that may look a little intimidating to a newer player. I do like a lot of the interesting data that's out there. But yeah, there's half of it's worthless, half of it's misleading, and some of it's dangerously misleading to the point where it'll point you in a direction, like we said, average launch angle, where you don't even want to be, or average exit velocity. So yeah, do you think there is too much data, or do you think it's just the nature of the beast? You kind of have to dig in yourself, and maybe we don't necessarily or haven't gotten to the point where we've explained to the audience well enough or weeded out the bad analytics to try to, let the good ones shine.
Here's the thing, Matt. The challenge that you have and the challenge that I've had for nearly 40 years is that most of our readers, most of our listeners are not math geeks. Most of them are English majors. And back when I was first writing, one of the early letters I got was some guys saying, "Could you please explain these numbers in terms that I can understand? I am a Victorian literature major." And so, I took this to heart, and I realized that whatever we do here, we have to make the data, we have to make our advice, we have to make the metrics accessible. And that was like a key word that I always hung over my desk, that whatever we do, we have to make accessible. And that means, if that means, explaining these metrics in a way that people understand, or condensing them into something that is recognizable. The X stats, I think, are really, really good for new players, because they can see that Jordan Alvarez had 33 home runs last year, but his X home runs was over 40. That's something you can connect to. And the X home run stat itself is based on sound statistical principle, but it's culled down to a single metric that people can understand. And I think that's our job as advisors in this industry, to help our listeners, now readers, being able to use this more, especially for the newer ones who are getting into this hobby for the first time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you try to make it as simple as possible. I admitted I like getting into some of the newer, like kind of down a rabbit hole statistics. But whenever I bring it up, especially on the show, because this is my platform to talk about whatever I want, I am incredibly redundant on the show in terms of when I bring up standard deviation of launching, when I bring up something simple as Z contact, O swing, anything that a newer audience member, someone who's brand new to the show, doesn't understand, I will always do a small definition, real quick, not to bog down the show, to just remind everyone what it does. And that's my way of being able to talk about the stuff I want to, while still reminding everyone, and giving also something that's important. Pitcher List is doing this year, which I think Fangraphs have had it on their site a little bit. It's just something across the board that I think is the best. One of the most important and strongest things you can give to the audience is giving a league average for a lot of these statistics, especially the newer ones, because it gives you a context that the person can hold on to. Like, all right, here's the league. This is where this hitter is in this particular. Like, all right, he has an 85. He has like he has a 28% O swing, which is swings outside of the strike zone. Let's say for a pitcher, you see the league average is around 31%, and then you see where someone where like Jacob deGrom is. So you can see where the top of the league is, you can see where the average is, and you can see where this player falls. And very quickly, you've taken a statistic you had no idea about, and you have a pretty good idea of the skill of what the player is doing just based on league average. So that is something that I think is real important. So that's, it's starting to be a little more put out there, but that's
the thing is with that, your listener, your reader doesn't need to know anything else about the statistic other than that benchmark that you've supplied to them, so they can use that now in whatever application they need to, without knowing anything else about that stat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And and it doesn't necessarily be league average for anything. It's just context. If you can give context to give them an idea of what the number means, that is beautiful. And that's something, I think that everyone's doing a better job as. So getting into all the current stats we have available right now, what are your favorite metrics currently to break down hitters? You already brought up the BABS over fantasy. Do you just call it BABS, or you just call it BABS?
BABS. It's BABS. And she's gorgeous. You'd like her.
Oh, I do. I do. So, I mean, obviously that is something we want to talk about right now. But we've already been plugging, the fan graphs, plate discipline metrics are everything. I see swing, swings outside of the strike zone, which is obviously important for both pitchers and hitters.
Mhm.
Z contact, contact within the strike zone, very important for both pitchers and hitters. You want to make contact as a hitter. This is Tony Kemp, by the way, over 90% for his career. Doesn't have much power, but man, he makes a lot of contact. And then for pitchers, you don't want that to be necessarily very high, unless
Mhm.
you're like an extreme ground ball pitcher, but it's still, you don't want that to be around 90. Baseball Savant, we've talked about that. They have the pretty color sliders, which are insanely misleading sometimes, but they are fun and everyone likes to point to them, but there's a lot of information there. So what is your favorite metrics right now to use to evaluate hitters? In terms of, let's say, preparation before the season, you're looking at what happened last year. You're looking at maybe the trends that are going on. You're preparing for your drafts. What are your favorite metrics to look at to evaluate hitters?
Yeah, I have to be honest, I don't use a lot of the advanced metrics myself. Over the last few years, I've been more into the gameplay aspect, the game theory aspect of fantasy, and so I've been focusing more on that part of the game, and trying, like I said earlier, looking more at the X stats to try to make it an easier process of trying to evaluate talent. So, like on Fangraphs, I use mostly as for reference material and as a sanity check for the things that I'm doing. I hardly use Baseball Savant at all, not because it's not good, it's great, but there are a lot more smarter people than me who do a lot greater stuff with it. You read Saris and the type of things that he's been doing. I mean, you never get tired of that. But for my own purposes, I've been leaving that type of material to the people who are smarter than I would.
And you said, I mean, even the X stats that you do your own over at Baseball HQ, which is,
Mhm.
again, I'll take this moment to tell everyone, Fangraphs and Savant are brought up a ton for preseason checks. The full baseball forecaster is the best thing you could possibly do. Comes out around Thanksgiving time. It's like a little early holiday present. Everyone should get on there. You can get a PDF download if you are on standby order. Get it shipped to you. You can go through. It's just fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. And you update the projections if you want to do that. You update them closer to the season, which is obviously very important. But X stats, yours and even though the ones of Savant, there's a lot of information that goes into creating those.
Right.
So if someone is too intimidated to go into the individual aspects, there's a lot of ingredients that kind of go into cooking up the X stats too, so, which is why they're so great. Personally, I do like diving into. Again, like I said, I like diving into different things. If someone made a tangible change with their mechanics, or someone had like a hot streak, I'd like to go in and see if there was a reason for it. I do like plate discipline for hitters. I love following that. Not only is it a real indication of someone has improved, especially a younger hitter, it's something that usually translates from year to year. It's something where if you're trying to project a prospect up to the majors, you never know. I mean, the gap between AAA and the majors, as far as talent, hasn't been bigger, and it has been in the recent. It's a huge gap now, but if you have a low strikeout rate and a high walk rate in the minors, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be able to survive at the major league level easier than most.
Right.
So, yeah, I like to go in to see if someone is chasing less, if someone's making more contact. That is something I really like to look at. How about pitching? I mean, I assume it's the same answer from you. We'll get into this only because it's different. It's a different way to look at it.
Mhm.
And especially last year with the sticky substance with the baseballs we don't know on, everyone's checking on velocity and spin rate. And it's kind of a waste because we don't even know what kind of baseball they're using this season. They're not telling us. But
Right.
there's a lot to look at. Is there anything that you tend to look at for pitching, or is it kind of the same story as you were saying with hitters?
No, we have several different gauges for expected ERA, xERA, Sierra, FIP, xFIP. I mean, I look at all of those. They provide a sanity check, and I think since those gauges really encompass a lot of the important elements of skill for a pitcher, I think it's very helpful. I also look at swinging strike rate, first pitch strike rate, things like that, which give a little bit of indication too. But again, those are the ones I typically use the most.
Yeah, same thing. I like there's so much to look. A lot of people look at velocity and spin rate, which
Mhm.
is more of an indicator if someone's going to get injured than maybe necessarily break out if there's a drop rather than a rise. My favorite thing I would have to say is a pitch mix, because you
Mhm.
can go into, especially last season, if you want to see if someone improved. Blake Snell, for example, who has his own injury worries. There has been people, Nick Pollock from Pitcher List, there's been people that have been calling for him to ditch that changeup for some time now. He did. He removed it from his arsenal last 2 months. Monster. And you can point to that being a reason. I did a thread on Pablo Lopez last year. I was calling for him to throw his changeup a lot more because it was such a dangerous pitch. He DMs me to tell me how much he enjoys the thread. And then he goes out there and throws the changeup more, which of course I had nothing to do with, but I take credit for anyway.
You
Because
should.
the Marlins, the Marlins like to throw changeup. But yeah, I told there's a reason for these things. So I like going in and seeing. It's a good way to like see if a pitcher that you didn't necessarily buy in on is pitching above his head to start the season. Go in and check some things out. You can go Baseball Savant, for example, Brooks Baseball is another one where you can go in easily and just see the percentage of pitches they're throwing early on. If there's a big difference, maybe there's a reason, is something to buy into. So that's something I really like to take a look at there. As far as newer players, what do you think a newer player, like they're just into fantasy baseball now, let's say maybe they were playing casually in just like a home league, just a few of their friends, maybe they're just moving over, not necessarily into high stakes or anything, but something a little more serious. They want to improve their game. They, a lot of people get into fantasy baseball for different reasons. A long time ago, I got into it just to bond with my dad more. We're both Mets fans, but we wanted to get in, and this allows you to kind of learn the entire player pool of the league in a great way. You can talk about baseball all the time. It's just a fun way to connect with the game. But if someone wants to just actually improve their performance in fantasy and they're foreign to all of this data that's flying around, what do you think? And not just data, but like you were saying, the scouting and anything else you can do. What do you think would be the best thing and best advice you would give to a newer player or, a novice player to focus on to improve and take their game to the next level in this age of fantasy baseball?
Well, this is going to sound like heresy coming from the guy who is the author of the Baseball Forecaster, but my biggest piece of advice is to not obsess over the numbers. It, there's so much noise. The error bars are so wide. I think about if a player has a 3-year trend in home runs, 15, 20, 25, that don't assume that's a growth curve. Any one of those points could be an outlier. In fact, the research shows that the fourth point in that trend, 15, 20, 25, that fourth point is more likely to be something like 18 than to be anything over 25. I write in the Baseball Forecaster that the two most powerful forces known to man are regression and gravity. So when in doubt, always project down. You'll be more often right than you're wrong. Yeah.
Are you telling me Bobby Dalbec's not hitting 80 home runs this year? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Sorry, Matt, just not happening.
Um,
that said, I mean, there's still a ton of really good work going on now that I don't think you can ignore. I think you have to be rudimentarily aware of it. And again, aware that it describes skill. And those descriptive gauges are very, very important. So spend a day reading Eno Sarris, spend a day reading Nick Pollock. To the extent that that information is going to help you project numbers. I haven't been convinced of that yet, but it's coming. It's coming. I mean, that's the thing. We look at what's going on now as a fixed reality, a fixed point in time, but things are advancing and changing all the time. I could be sitting here next year and suddenly there's a major revelation that players' eye color predicts how they're going to do in night games on Wednesdays. So
there probably will be. I mean, it is crazy how in depth some of this. Well, the baseball, just baseball telecasts have been doing this for years with the, hey, Jacob deGrom has a 0 ERA on Tuesdays at between 2 and 3 p.m. in July. So yeah, they get pretty down in there. I would say to newer players, there is so much out there. Try to just peek around. Like Ron was just saying, read Nick Pollock. Get the Baseball Forecaster. Listen to the Turn 2 podcast. Listen to the Launch Angle podcast. There's so many things out there that you really should just dip around and read and then kind of fall in what makes sense to you. Sometimes something will resonate with you. Something will just click in your head the way something is described to you. We're like, all right, well, that makes sense. So-and-so is saying that, Kyle Schwarber signing with the Phillies is going to do this and this based on this. Anything, go around and listen to different things and don't get overwhelmed. Especially if this is fun for you, if this is not something you're doing competitively, it's for fun. You want to keep it fun. Uh, yeah, just narrow down the things you want. You don't want to listen to everything. You want to kind of experiment where you can, give everything a chance, and then narrow it down to the people that entertain you, the people that educate you in a way that resonates back with you. I think that is the best thing you can do, because the last thing you want to do is overwhelming yourself, and all of a sudden baseball's ruined for you because you're over analyzing certain
Right.
things, and you're getting
Mhm.
super frustrated, and
Yep.
that's not what you want. And so we talked about this a little earlier. What this will be the last question, one of the last questions. Actually, we have a couple more. But what do you think is missing in data analysis now, that you think would be the most useful? Because everyone's always attempting to come up with the next big thing to put the spotlight on them and
Yeah.
help everyone else. Um, what do you think would be, that next thing that you would like to see? Like, maybe you're like, it's something that's above your head, above my head. We just don't want to put the work in, what have you, or don't know
Mhm.
how to go about it. What do you think would be something good? I had something here where I think maybe a good way to measure consistency with mechanics. Like, they have
Mhm.
all these things now, the freaking Hawkeye and lasers, and I don't know what they
Mhm.
have. They can put the little sensors that people use for video games. Maybe something that shows like how consistent mechanics are. They have things for pitchers like release point, but maybe something that they have all that information, that could be the next thing coming. But anything off the top of your head that think you wish there would be, that you think that would be the most useful?
Well, I touched on it before a little bit. I mean, a lot of my efforts now have been going into the actual fantasy game playing aspect, and I'd like to see a lot of this data integrated into playing the game. I think for the purposes of fantasy baseball, gameplay is not as well sussed out as skills analysis right now. So, you know, performance forecasting is just one part of the process and skills evaluation. But why aren't there more tools like the Rotolab draft software, which integrates the data into the drafting process? I've seen some recent writing on tools that provide you with who the optimal player is to pick at any point in the draft. So you're in, say, the 12th round, based on your roster needs and the player pool. Here are your best options. Yeah, I have a rudimentary version of this at Babs Baseball that integrates the ADPs into our player ratings and slots all the players into a round where you should target them. But I think there needs to be some, maybe more AI here too. I want to know who in my league is most likely to bid against me for Pete Alonso, based on their past bidding behavior and what I'll likely have to pay to get him in my draft. I mean, that type of information I think would be fascinating. I don't want to completely automate the systems to run my draft for me, but I think there are areas where we can get better information than we have now to help us manage our drafts and our instances and roster management better.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that is a great point, especially things where maybe you can input your own information and get a
Hmm.
different output.
Yeah.
I had an episode of of Turn Two not too long ago with Ariel Cohen. We talked about opportunity cost based on everyone talking about whether or not you want to take Vladimir Guerrero in the first round, and it
Hmm.
has nothing to do with necessarily the skills or the statistics projected, but a roster construction thing.
Right.
So it'd be nice, in a draft, we're like, all right, if I took so and so here, what does that mean for how I'm going to fill out the rest of my categories? You're talking about position scarcity or whatever. Like, if I skip on a third baseman here, and I have to settle for options later, like, what does this likely do? What is the best choice for me? Not
Hmm.
in terms of best available player, but best available player for my team.
Hmm.
And you would think we actually have available software to probably get something like that done. But it's something kind of along the lines of what you were saying, where,
Hmm.
you think there'd be a lot of strategy based AI that could help out, and that would definitely help out newer players,
You know,
and definitely, and newer players and advanced players alike.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting that we have the technology to do a lot of this stuff, but sometimes the technology doesn't keep up with the need. And one of the best examples I can think of this is that for the longest time, and still to a great extent, the in-season free agent bidding process is done as a blind bidding process. You have 1,000 units to spend on in-season players, and you're blind bidding against everyone else. And this is like one of my major gripes in playing this game. Yet we have the tools to do like an eBay system to set up the bidding for players. And I only know of like one or two websites that do that now. And for the longest time, that was not done when it seemed like such an obvious application of something that we needed. So yeah, the the ability for us to do a lot of these things is there. We just need to take action and have it done.
Yeah, a smaller example of that, but a great way to describe what you're just saying is, yeah, the sometimes it's the demand versus the difficulty to accomplish or the worth. I talked to Derek over at NFBC. He's kind of the behind the scenes guy who sets up a lot of things,
Mhm.
and I was asking, hey, do you have anything you can do to set up a queue, your draft queue? So if you're in a draft, sometimes you don't want to, you're in a slow draft, you don't want to hold up people, but you don't necessarily want to set a queue of like 5 players because maybe if someone gets taken, you want a chance to think about and change.
Mhm.
But it would be nice to like maybe set a queue where you have 2 guys at the top, and if they're there, it'll auto draft. But that if they're not, it'll take you off auto draft. And he said, "Yeah, we thought about it. It's just too much of a pain to build, and we haven't come up with it. And there's been not enough of a need. So even though it seems like a simple thing, it just can't be done. Not that I'm saying that I think that is some kind of groundbreaking thing that I think needs to be done. It was just something I was asking about. And sometimes it's just a matter of maybe it seems obvious and it's just too difficult and it's not worth doing.
Yeah, but if they did do that, everybody would realize, oh my God, how did we not have this for the last 10
Oh,
years?
I think it would be a fantastic feature. It would
Yes.
definitely speed drafts up.
Yes.
So yeah, that's interesting for the future of the game. I'm sure there'll be many things to come. We're in this age where even though baseball is trying to shoot itself in the foot as many times as given an opportunity, it's still a great game and it continues to grow.
Yep.
That being said, they have some plans. They have some rule changes planned for the future in hopes to make the game better. I think that there's some people I think I actually agree with some of these rule changes we'll get into, like the clock, the pitching clock,
Mm.
I mean, we'll get into shift. That's its own thing. But they're doing all these things for pace of play. And as much as people dislike certain things and they're like, oh, well, this is going to shorten the game from 4 hours to 3 hours and 45 minutes. Who cares? Harold Reynolds, who doesn't necessarily always give, I think, opinions that I think make the most sense.
You're
But
so diplomatic.
yeah, he's very passionate about baseball, and he actually gave a opinion on this that I strongly agreed with. He said it's not a matter again of the length of the game. There's plenty of long games. It's the pace of play, and he was kind of
Mhm.
showing videos of you don't want to see that much time between pitchers of people stepping out of the box and diddling around. Like he was showing games from like 15, 20 years ago. It was just like pitch and then like 10 seconds pitch. So it's not a matter of how long the game is. It's just you don't want to make it tedious to sit there and watch like grass growing. The
Right.
game can be long as the pace is up, and I think that's an important distinction that a lot of is lost on a lot of people. Um, any thoughts on that before we get into the shift, which is an entirely different thing?
No, no, absolutely. I mean, we were going to talk about what other rule changes I thought uh, might be relevant here, and that really was the one. The only rule change I have interest is anything that can speed up the game. Yeah, I don't mind sitting through 4 hours if both teams are combining for 12 runs and 20 hits and 3 lead changes. But a 4-hour 2-to-1 game with 25 strikeouts tests the ability of my attention span. So yeah, definitely.
And the other rule changes, they have things like making the bases larger.
Hmm.
I saw this the last year when they were talking about it. They wanted to make there were 2 different rules they were testing, and I was like, if they combine these two, it'll be brutal. They wanted to make the bases larger, and they wanted to limit the amount of times a pitcher could throw over. You'll have people stealing 90 bases if you somehow run out of the ability to throw over.
Yeah.
But they haven't talked about limiting that. They've making the larger bases will increase stolen bases, and it'll probably maybe decrease some injuries. I'm not sure how much that'll necessarily change. That is something that people will be measuring the distances and sprint speed. It's beyond me to predict, but that is something. But what about something a lot more um, out there, like the shift? We don't know how. We know they're banning it next year. We don't know how. The one thing they're doing in the minor leagues is they're going to try to limit 2 fielders to the left of second base, 2 to the right. I don't know if this means people are going to line someone right next to the bag and have them sprint over, and people are going to try to game it. But I put out an article on NBC last week on who will benefit. And it wasn't necessarily just the obvious people of, all right, here's some left-handed power hitters who hit a lot of grounders like Joey Gallo. Who's this going to benefit? I went into line drives up the middle, ground balls up the middle, who were automatic hits. You used to watch baseball like, oh, ground ball up the middle, there's a single. And then you just watch the third baseman or the shortstop just pick it up like it's nothing and throw to first. So it impacts so many more people than you would even realize. Michael Conforto on line drives and ground balls up the middle was just brutalized last year, even though he was only shifted on like 68% of the time, nothing like 90% like a Carlos Santana or the Joey Gallows of the world
Yeah.
or Chris Carpenter or not Chris Carpenter, Matt Carpenter.
Uh,
Chris Carpenter should not be
no.
batting.
No.
But how do you like the shift ban? First, from just a practical standpoint, as a baseball fan, do you think we should be forcing an easier road? I know some people don't understand how hard it is to bunt a 100-mile-an-hour elevated fastball.
That's
Will Clark thinks that batters should figure out how to do it, but Will Clark was a very good hitter.
mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing, and I wrote about this in the introduction, in my introduction, in this year's Forecaster. I mean, at its core, defensive shifting is just part of the natural batter versus pitcher metagame. We do one adjustment begets another adjustment, so yeah, maybe batters do need to somehow learn to hit the other way. Yeah, it's hard, uh, but the impetus for this rule is to increase offense, and I think the shift is not the core way to do it. The core issue is that pitchers are throwing harder. It's so hard that hitting a pitch ball 100 miles an hour may be nearing the limit of human reaction time. So you think about it. Back in 2002, there were just 5 pitchers with an average fastball velocity of 95 miles an hour. Last year, there were 128. That's a 25-time increase in the last 20 years.
And you
And
have
I
these
think,
college kids on TV nowadays throwing 103.
yeah.
Like, yeah, yeah.
So where's the limit? I mean, I think that's what's breaking the game's competitive balance, and something probably does need to be done to level the playing field. But shift limitations are not fixing the core issue. Honestly, I don't know what the options are. Maybe moving the pitcher's mound back. I don't know. Um, but that all said, if restrictions are placed on defensive shifts, it could have a big impact on the numbers. Like you said, batting averages could spike for some players. Joey Gallo might go in the first round. Uh, I mean, ERAs for most pitchers will tick up a bit. I think of all the changes that are being discussed, like you said, this is the one that probably scares forecasters the most because we really don't know exactly how to account for it and how many players it's going to affect.
No, I agree with you that the best way to probably deal with this is a mound change. Like, I mean, they had to change it for Bob Gibson because he was so
Hmm.
dominant. That's
Hmm.
probably the point we're at. I don't necessarily care about policing the shift as much. I was of the opinion, I always have been, that I didn't want to change. I thought it was silly to give in to people's inability to do better or to adjust and to go the other way and take the bunt. But the more I had talked to players, the more I've looked at tape. Not only are the pitchers are throwing like 100 and in, it's hard to do. So much time has gone by where I would think if players had the ability to do this, they probably would have by now, at least some of them, and they haven't.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's ended careers. Carpenter, Ryan Howard to a degree, Chris
Hmm.
Davis. It's ending careers. And not only are pitchers, defense is setting up to pitch inside, pitchers are pitching to that effect. If they want you, if you're a pull ball hitter and you're setting up over there, they're pitching you inside.
Yeah.
They want you to pull the ball. So, not only are you now getting a pitch that's just hard to hit in general, but now you're being pitched inside as well. So it's very difficult and impossible to forecast because yeah, if they do change it, it's not as simple as all right. These hitters that we're getting shifting on are better. Pitchers are going to pitch differently.
Hmm.
Defenses are going to do certain different things. I mean, there's a lot of things you can't account for. Rule changes always have unintended circumstances, and that's kind of the way it always will be.
Right.
So yeah, it's very interesting. All right, let's thing to end the show here. This is back to a regular redraft and the show on just a regular fantasy baseball team. Who are a couple of late round targets that you find interesting? Maybe some that have even popped up recently because of trades that you think could make a splash this season. That maybe end game of redraft leagues that you think that might be worth a stash to see maybe what happens in spring training or earlier in the year that maybe aren't being talked about enough.
Well, I'm going to rely on my BAB system to explain how this process works. The way I try to pick out players that meet that description you said. What the broad assessment balance sheet does is groups players together with similar skills profiles and then ranks them by their ADPs. So this year, the top ranked pitching skills group has just 2 players, Corbin Burns and Jacob DeGrom. No surprise there. The second ranked group has 5 pitchers, and this is interesting. At the top, ranked by ADP, is Garrett Cole. Okay. Next is Max Scherzer, who's going about 10 picks later, but you can see that On a skills basis, they're pretty similar pitchers. The next two pitchers are Shane Bieber and Chris Sale. Again, comparable skills profiles, a bit more risky, which is why they're going a bit later in the ADPs. In BABS, each player is rated for their risks as well. But the thought process is if you can build these player risks into your risk budget, which is something we also do, then it makes sense to take the potential profit on those later picks because you're getting comparable skills, comparable to someone like Garrett Cole, who is more expensive. Now, the last player in this bucket is someone who's going now to around pick 140, and that's Shane Baz. He's obviously so deeply discounted because he has only 13 major league innings experience, but that risk factor is also that's something that Babs accounts for. So again, the thought process is build that risk into your budget and take the potential profit with a player at pick 140 who has the potential upside of someone who's being drafted in the first and second round. So that's how we do that.
Yeah, another good reason to go over and subscribe over at Baseball HQ and get your eye on the Babs. There's so many ways to pick out. There's someone that pick out like dark horse candidates or everything. I usually try to do things from an at bat standpoint where the played out meme at this point of who's this year's Robbie Ray, who's your Cedric Mullins. Spoiler alert: it's probably nobody,
Mm-hmm.
and it probably will be nobody. But in the terms of looking for Cedric Mullins, for example, in the terms of looking for a player that would find himself unexpected playing time that maybe has skills that could translate into a season that you may not expect. I had favorites that were just blown up recently in the last 2 days. I love Tyrone Taylor of the Brewers. A little power and speed, Christian Yelich and Lorenzo Cain on the team probably weren't staying on the field. Boom. Andrew McCutchen shows up. Doesn't shut off necessarily the playing time for Tyrone Taylor. The other two guys are still very injury prone, and McCutchen could be on the platoon end of his career, but that's not good. I loved Harold Ramirez coming from the Guardians to the Cubs. With only person really plugging up playing time was Jason Hayward and Clint Frazier, who's still dealing, with dizziness, and we don't sure how that'll go. Boom, Seiya Suzuki signs there. Huge gut punch. A lot of my favorite guys have really been, taking a back seat. Mike Vierling, they talked about him platooning in Philadelphia. They bring in Kyle Schwarber to clog up the DH. So a lot of my own favorites are kind of getting dismantled a little bit here. But I usually like to look at things like playing time, and that's one thing that's worth looking at is lineups in spring training. Mike Curlin, my friend Mike Curlin at Mike_Curlin, even built a tool that's I think linked in his profile. He does this every year. He goes through spring training lineups every single day, and he breaks down what teams are doing interesting. And one of the interesting things last year was Cedric Mullins. He was in there every day. He was one of the only people in there. Hayes wasn't necessarily in there every day. DJ Stewart ended up getting injured, and the prediction was that Cedric Mullins was not only going to play towards the top of the lineup, and sometimes you can get some things there. So yeah, if your draft is coming up in a little bit, pay attention to what teams are doing early on because you won't see as many scrubs this year. There's not enough time, so the regulars are going to get in there early and often, and just try to pay attention to what teams are doing and maybe try to get yourself a little extra value there at the end of drafts.
Yeah, I wouldn't give up on Tyrone Taylor, though. I'll tell you. I
already drafted him, so he's not going anywhere.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, the Babs group that he's in has names like Luis Robert, like Cedric Mullins, like you said. He's in that skills group. Players like Javier Baez, Dalton Varsho, Chris Taylor. He's in that group. But I mean, so he has the skills profile. But when you start discounting him because he's being blocked for playing time, I don't buy into that. Whenever I hear the phrase, this player has no path to playing time, I reject that because with more than 50% of the draftable player population going to end up on the IL during the season, there's almost always going to be a path to playing time. And I look at Taylor and I mean, who does he have to beat out? Basically, Lorenzo Cain is already a walking injury. Yelich is probably going to split DH with McCutchen. Renfroe is more of a right fielder. Taylor's probably more suited to left. I mean, there's going to be opportunities there for him. So where he's going now, close to pick 500, that's like a free pick for someone who has the skills upside of potentially a Cedric Mullins. So
I agree. The reason you were saying not to cross off people, especially going that late for playing time. That's why I loved him, because I didn't think Yelich and Kane would be an issue. I just don't appreciate the McCutchen ad. I just don't like that. I'm like, okay, McCutchen, you could have signed anywhere. Do you really got to put a little roadblock in front of my dude that I've already drafted? Just go sign somewhere else, man. You could have gone anywhere. Go back to Philly.
I know that. I had Ryan Jeffers before they picked up Sanchez, so I was.
Although I should play Jeffers anyway. They need to move on.
I do.
They need to move Sanchez or just cut him. He was almost non-tendered anyway.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining me, Ron. This was a great show. I had a lot of fun talking to you. Is there anything, everyone knows who you are. Anyone listening to the show doesn't know who Ron Shandler is. Shame on you. But let everyone know, is there anything new you have coming up? Is there anything you've adjusted for the delayed season? Do you have any updates coming up on anything's at Baseball HQ? I recommend everyone go sign up over there. Fantastic staff over there as well. So just kind of remind everyone where they can find everything you're working on and any information you kind of want to shout out to the audience.
Sure. My home right now is babsbaseball.com, and that's where I'm doing all this stuff with Babs. And you can still hop on and get a membership to that. It carries you through the preseason, gives you all your draft prep. Still front the Baseball Forecaster. We just got done with our first pitch forum conference. So I'm still involved with the conferences with Baseball HQ. You can find me on Twitter at Ron Shandler. And like I said earlier, I'm in the process of writing a book that I hope to be out by the end of this year called Fantasy Expert, which basically is a historical memoir looking back at the early days of fantasy baseball and the people who were the industry's first experts. So a lot of information like on the creation of labor and tout wars, and a lot of interesting stories coming out of those. So that's what I've been working on.
I'm irrationally excited for this book. I mean, they have books like Matthew Barry came out with Fantasy Life. He's basically like a football guy now. He used to 06, 0-0 baseball. He's now usually football. But yeah, Eddie, this book has me excited. I'll definitely be getting a copy. I'll probably get a couple of extra and give some out to the audience as well.
Okay, great.
So yeah, thank you for joining the show. Like I said, this is a fantastic episode. I had a ton of fun. Everyone, you can follow me on Twitter, Matt Williams, MATTWI77IMS. If you hear anything on the show here ever or in my articles over at NBC, and you are not sure, again, some of the advanced analytics we talk about, if you had any questions on how to use it yourself, if you have any questions about how to do your own research, my DMs are always open for that reason. Reach out to me. I love talking baseball, and I'm more than happy to explain things privately if you don't want to talk out in the public. So thank you for listening to the Turn 2 podcast. We'll be back next week as spring training games will be officially started. We'll have video. Today, Max Scherzer's game in a sim start was actually broadcast live. I'm just sitting here geeking out watching it. Dom Smith took him deep twice, which is interesting. I think career, he was 0 for 16 with like seven strikeouts or something crazy. But yeah, it takes Scherzer deep twice. Baseball's back, everybody. So yeah, we'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to the show.